right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Ridge Talk. I'm Pastor Justin here in the South Ridge studio. With me today, we've got Pastor Sean and Pastor Daniel. And each one will have an opportunity to share more here in just a minute. But I want to let you know, if you have not liked or subscribed to the podcast, feel free to go ahead and take the opportunity to do so at the information that's provided there on the bottom of the screen. That way you'll just know every time a new episode drops. So we've been navigating through Proverbs for the past few weeks.
That's right.
Pastor Daniel's really taken the lead in teaching through this series. And this week, it was really all about the fear of the Lord. So just give us a quick summary, Daniel, from the message that you gave this Sunday.
Yeah, well, it wasn't all about the fear of the Lord. That was a big portion of it, though. I started with that because that's such a prolific phrase in the Proverbs. You see it all throughout the scriptures, but this idea of the fear of the Lord. And I really just said we can't really understand that phrase just by taking it at face value or like at its component parts. I think often people read the fear of the Lord as being afraid of God or fearful of God, fearful of his holiness or fearful of what he might do if I don't live according to how he wants me to live. And that's really not what the phrase means. It's an idiomatic phrase that really has more to do with reverence and respect, humility, and even a love, like a deep trust and affection in...
Awe is the word that I think of.
Awe is probably a good word.
A-W-E.
I talked about, I don't know how well this went over. In fact, in the first service, which I never do this, I told people that, well, when we do that, when we say the fear of the Lord is like comprised of its individual parts, we're committing the root fallacy. And then I never said this. I never do this, but I said, everybody say root fallacy. And everybody said root fallacy. That was so dumb. It wasn't in my notes to do that, but I did it. Everyone followed. There was no point to it.
Sometimes those are my internally my favorite moments when I teach is like you just decide off the cuff to do something and it falls completely flat.
You know, it didn't even fall flat. It just had no purpose, like other than just to make people repeat something. But I gave the example of the English phrase, the word butterfly, where if you just take it comprised of its root words and its component parts, you might. And I gave the weird illustration about archaeologists thousands of years in the future looking at the word butterfly and trying to figure out what it means, and it's flies that emerge from a vat of butter. And that's not at all what a butterfly is. And so in the same way, when we see the fear of the Lord, interpreting that or reading that as being afraid of God is not what it is. It never can, be the truth and the beauty of what that is. But I said, you know what? So now that we know what the fear of the Lord is, and it's this affectionate reverence, this awe and respect for God, the question is, well, why would we have that? And so I tried to paint a portrait of God from the Proverbs. I made the point at the beginning that and I think this is true, that it's good for us to look to the Proverbs and try to see ourselves in the Proverbs and what we need to grow in. It's the stated purpose of the Proverbs that people would grow as they encountered the wisdom in Proverbs. But if we're only looking for ourselves and we're not looking for God in the pages of Proverbs and what it teaches us about him, then we're missing out on a really big aspect. And so the four things I talked about were God is intentionally relational. There's 915 verses in Proverbs. God is explicitly mentioned in 100 of them, and 87 of those mentions, it's his covenant name, Yahweh. The name of a God who's intentionally relational, who draws near and has a people for himself. And so that was kind of the first point. The second is that God is a loving creator. Creation is mentioned 10 times throughout the book of Proverbs, and several times just very explicitly pointing us back to God as a creator. And because he is a loving creator, he's created a beautiful world for us to inhabit. But he understands how the world works, and he crafted and designed that world according to wisdom. And so it's the point there is that the principle is that the same wisdom that was used to design the world and to sustain the world is the same wisdom that we need to have a thriving and enduring life. And so that was the second point. The third was that God is perfectly sovereign. I spent a lot of time talking about God's sovereignty and how it means at the very least that he sees everything and knows everything, but that it's even more than that. He exercises perfect and complete control over historical events, over the hearts of leaders, over things that we perceive as chance. I'm going to get the verse wrong. It's 16:33 maybe, that, we cast lots, but the Lord determines how they fall.
Yep.
Things that we perceive as chance, like rolling dice, is God determines how that works out. And so that's a pretty high view of God's sovereignty. And there was more that we talked about in that section. And then the last thing I said is that it continuously reveals God to be a righteous judge who God is a just God. He is the source of justice. And not only will he ultimately execute justice for all his creation and all of his creatures, but even as we live life now, there are things that we don't even often know or perceive as justice that God is already working out. Where he works for the favor of those who are righteous and against those who are wicked.
Yeah, I love the Proverbs. I love all the poetry in the Old Testament. Psalms, Proverbs, the book of Job is filled with poetry. Lamentations, of course, is all poetry. But the Proverbs, it was basically a textbook for young men in that day and age. This is what it looks like to live a life of integrity. These are principles to live by. And so your message on Sunday that just focused all on, hey, this is the nature and character of God. This is who he is. He is sovereign. He is relational. I remember my Old Testament professor in seminary, and it wasn't Yahweh. It was one of the other names of God in the Old Testament. But he's like, when you get down into the ancient language and translate this, really the best translation of it is the God of the two breasts. And he said it was a picture image of God as somebody who is standing with his arms wide open saying, I am approachable. You can come close to me. I am relational. I want to be near you. And it's just great to see that woven all throughout the scriptures, that God he's extremely relational. Yeah.
He's incredibly relational.
So I know, Sean, you were traveling this weekend. I didn't know if you had any...
I was hoping you would forget that I was sitting here.
You don't need to share anything. I just didn't know if you had any thoughts to share on the brief outline that Daniel just shared. You can say no if you want to.
No, I definitely think that there are so many different themes and ideas about who God is and how he relates that are found in Proverbs. And I think it can get really tricky sometimes to interpret those things and apply them in our modern way of thinking. And then to also even just understand like the degree to which those things apply. Like we've talked about that, I think, on a previous episode, that many times those things are not meant to be formulas that have a determined outcome every single time.
That's right.
So as you read it, you have to be careful not to look at it, especially I think our culture very much likes to try to have things almost like an equation, A plus B equals C. If I do this and I add this to my life, then this is going to be the outcome. I think we have to continue to be careful as we read through those things. And then even in your mentioning of like the sovereignty of God and that God will determine where those lots fall, I think we have to also be careful that we don't think that every single detail that happens in our life is like God causing that to happen. Like if I go out to the bottom of the driveway here and pull out in front of a car and get into an accident, I don't think that I would say, oh, that was God's sovereignty causing that to happen in that case. I chose to not pay attention and pull out in front of that car. But if we're not careful, I think sometimes, again, we can just like, we can read those things, and if we misapply them, I think it can lead to some disappointment or some misunderstanding. So it is important to keep in mind the type of literature that is, what it's trying to communicate, which is usually principles and not like rules. It's usually, hey, this is wisdom that's collected to give you a broad portrait of God, but at the same time, we can't take every verse and like kind of proof text it to every situation in our lives. And I think that's an important part of where wisdom comes in.
That's right.
In reading that. So
certainly, especially with the sovereignty of God, that's one of the trickiest
it's so hard
topics for people, because in his sovereignty, God has also created and established agency in his creatures. And so, that is interesting, right? Because if God is sovereign, God's sovereignty is not the same as fatalism, where everything is always going to happen the way it was, no matter what. Because if that was the case, why write a book of Proverbs? Why give people something in order to change and to say you can make meaningful decisions?
It starts to create some very problematic ways of viewing the world and God.
If you view God's sovereignty as fatalism, then yes, that's an incorrect view. There's still obviously human agency, and that is one of the most difficult things for people to kind of navigate as they're trying to wrap their heads around what is a meaningful decision, what is God doing, and what is my role in what he's doing.
So I will say I look forward to catching up on that. If I can just have a little aside, I guess, I did have a cool experience over the weekend attending a church with my family. So we went to visit my brother and went to their church, and they were having a 50-year anniversary for their church. So they had the pastor who was there in 1975, founded the thing and told their stories and all of that stuff. So it was a neat experience just to see the ways that God has moved elsewhere. I think for me, it was just a good perspective, being here and being very involved in just what happens at this one local church. You can get a little bit so consumed by all of that and forget that God is moving in the world, and he is. And so sometimes finding yourself in a season where maybe, and this has been true for us, our life has been filled with some challenges in these last several months. And it's very easy to get wrapped up just in that narrow, here's what I'm dealing with. So it was nice to have a perspective outside of ourselves and even just what's happening in our own household, to see these people who were so filled with joy celebrating what God has done in and through their church over the course of 50 years, and to listen to the story of a pastor who, by the way, is still filling in different churches where he lives now.
Really?
He has not retired. He is continuing in ministry. He said, albeit in a different way, is continuing to do that. So it was a really cool thing just to see heritage and legacy, and to watch people who have committed themselves to following Jesus and how they're living that out even to the end of their life. It was kind of inspiring for me.
So we're going to transition here at this time, talk a little bit about rule of life language. We rolled out rule of life language here at Southridge back in I think it was September. So it's been 5 months now, and but one of the principles that one of the values that we have is just union with God, growing in union with God, practicing the presence of God through scripture reading, prayer, silence, and Sabbath rest. And those first two, when you think of spiritual disciplines, scripture reading and prayer, those are generally the first things that come into people's mind. You say, hey, what are some steps that you can take to grow in the faith? And people go very quickly to read the Bible and spend time in prayer. And they're not wrong. Those are absolutely crucial. And one of the things we've said at Southridge for years is, we want to take information from the scriptures. We want to take information about God and from God and allow that to transform us in multiple ways. But when you look through the scriptures, you also see the way the people of God worship Him and interact with Him. They do so through both Sabbath rest and silence. And so I was just doing a little bit of reading on the topic of silence this week, trying to encourage our community groups to practice silence a little bit. But one of the verses that I had, I'm going to pull it up here just so I don't misread it. It comes from Lamentations chapter 3, it's verse 26. But it says, "It's good to wait quietly for salvation from the Lord." But I was digging into the text, like, okay, it's easy to read that in English, but when you dive into the Hebrew language, the word "good" there is the same word used for good in the creation account. Not every time that the word "good" comes up in our English Bible is it the same. There's several different Hebrew words. But the commentator was just noting, hey, the word "good" used here, being used as the same way in the creation account, that really matters. It's good to wait in silence for the salvation of the Lord. It is, the word "good" there is the way God used it in the creation account. It is beautiful. Something is now complete, so you can rest in it. So that's what probably Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. He was just writing about, hey, it is really, really good. It is complete. It is restful. It is a surrendering of control. It is good to wait in silence for the salvation of the Lord. And then there's other passages that come up too throughout Old Testament and New Testament on what it looks like to practice silence. But I'll just throw it out to you guys. When you think of union with God and practicing and engaging in silence, is that something that's easy for you to do, or is that a little bit more difficult for you to do? And what do you see as the benefits of engaging with silence?
Yeah, there are many benefits to engaging with silence. What was your exact question just now? It was...
Well, do you find that easy with your personality or yourself to engage in practices of silence?
Let me say this.
And it's like practicing the presence of God is the statement we use in our value statement. So, is engaging with God in silence, what are the benefits of doing that in practicing the presence of God?
There are so many benefits to it. I find myself desiring more silence the older I get. And one example of that for me is in high school and college days, and maybe even in my early 20s and early married life. If I was in the car, I was listening to music. I love music. I love listening to music. And then something happened. I don't know when. Probably what happened to a lot of guys my age in their mid to late 20s, I started listening to podcasts and talk radio instead of music. And then beyond that, I just, when I'm in my car, it's like one time where I'm like, I can just be silent and I don't have to listen to anything. Mm-hmm. And I find myself desiring that more. But if you're asking, like when it comes to times to still my mind and my heart and focus on the Lord, I find it very difficult to do. My brain is one that is always going. It's always, and as soon as I try to quiet myself, there's something else that's immediately comes to mind, and I have to, and I get distracted, and then and then I'm a minute into that distraction while I'm being silent, that I have to like come back and say, no, be still, be silent. Obviously the benefits of just another word that I associate with silence is calm. That there's just a calmness in a world that is often very busy and very full of chaos. And so to have that calm and that peaceful presence of the Lord is something that I think I know it changes you, and it can dramatically change the way that you interact with God, with other people, and even the way that you see yourself. But yeah, that doesn't mean I find it easy. But I absolutely see the benefits of it, and I desire it deeply in my own life.
How about you, Sean?
I find it easy to default to silence, but I think to your point of actually getting my mind focused on the presence of God, like that's the additional step there. I spend the majority of my time in silence. I don't have music on in the car usually, and sometimes a podcast, but yeah, so I experienced that even last night. Like I knew I just had a number of things kind of going through my mind last night, and was trying to get ready to go to bed, and I was like, I just need to pause and pray and kind of have some time here instead of just continuing to watch TV until I felt tired enough to go to bed. And it started out like it was so funny. I had, what felt like maybe a couple minutes, but was probably realistically like 30 seconds where I was intently focused, and then my mind just started wandering all over the place. And something that we've said, that can be, then you can feel discouraged, and then you can just give up. And I had that moment where I just about gave up, and then I kind of pressed through a little bit. And one of the things that I hang on to, an author or pastor said, like, if your mind wanders 100 times during the time that you're trying to be present to God, then it's 100 opportunities to just reorient yourself and say, Jesus, here I am. And I think that there is an aspect of it that I think God delights in the fact that he knows our challenges. He knows the way our brains work. He knows all of those things, that we would continue to just say, like, here I am, and to be present to him. I think he honors that. And it really does pay off too in those times where if that's a habit that's built in your life, to be able to orient your mind and your thinking toward God in any given moment, and develop that discipline, that when there are times where God is wanting to, in a moment, speak to you. Maybe it's about somebody that you're encountering. Maybe it's a situation that is unfolding and you might be tempted to respond or react. Those moments where we often in hindsight look and go, man, I really wish that I had heard God there, or been a little bit more discerning in a moment. Well, how does that happen? I don't think it just happens magically. I think it is because we do intentionally build that discipline into ourselves, to where in moments that are a little bit more acute, we've built that pathway in our minds. And so our minds tend to turn to God in those moments. And I've felt that as I ebb and flow in spending time in silence, there's a definite correlation to experiencing God in more acute moments versus when I know I haven't really been spending that time, and then I'm just kind of reacting and responding to life in a different way. So,
yeah. I've learned so much on this topic because it is a very difficult practice to put into place. And so one of the thoughts that I have is, even though our culture is completely different from ancient Middle Eastern culture in which Jesus was a part of, and the people of Israel all throughout the Old Testament, you can't really compare our culture today with their culture. But I think that we can compare ourselves with the people in that they didn't have the technology that we have, but they had just as many mental distractions and family distractions and things that were happening in life. I think that the reason that we see passages pop up, and Daniel mentioned before we pushed record here that the Proverbs has a lot to say about the practice of silence. The passage I read in Lamentations, there's another one in Zechariah. I mean, there's passages all throughout the scriptures on the benefits of practicing silence, and I think they're there because God knows it's difficult to do. he continually reminded his people, hey, come back to me. Remember that I am here, that I am watching over you, that I am sovereign, that you don't need to be in control of every little thing that happens. And I just think that's, and we see Jesus practice it all throughout the Gospels as well. But just in talking with, I've talked with a few dozen other pastors in other churches all across the country, and they talk about how difficult it is to put this into practice and how it usually takes 6 months or 12 months or a year and a half before they really start to experience the benefits of it. And as Sean just mentioned a minute ago, that pushing through, persevering, hey, I'm going to continue to put this into practice, is something that people generally have to do in order to get to a point where they're like, oh, now I'm beginning to experience some benefits from this that I wasn't in the very beginning. So, the rule of life language, we like to make sure we communicate that it isn't legalism. It isn't a, hey, I have to do this, or I'm a bad person. I'm not a good Christian in God's eyes if I'm not doing this. That's not the purpose of the rule of life. The purpose of it is, hey, what are the things that will lead me to grow in my love for God and my love for others? And we see silence as one of those things throughout the scriptures. And so I think the encouragement I can give just to the listeners is, if it isn't something that you practice, begin to just try it out. Try, a minute in the morning, 2 minutes before reading the scriptures or after reading the scriptures, just being in silence in the presence of God. And as Sean said, if your mind does get distracted 100 times, don't feel bad about that. That's 100 opportunities to turn back to Jesus and experience his presence. And if you try it for a week and you're like, man, this is just really awkward, you're not alone in that. Most people find it awkward. It isn't, we have so many things that are vying for our time and our attention, that are trying to form us and shape us, that getting away in silence feels like, well, I'm not accomplishing anything. I'm not doing anything. And that isn't true. My commentary reading on silence just indicated, hey, silence is not something that's passive. It is an active surrendering of yourself. It is a surrendering of control. It is actively acknowledging the presence of God with you in that moment. So it is a active practice, not a passive one, that we can put into place. So I just encourage everybody to persevere in that and begin to put it into practice. Any other thoughts you wanted to share, Daniel? You good?
No, I'm good. I think it's a good discussion.
Yeah. So, I guess that is all we have for this week. Be sure to tune in for our next episode as well. And again, if you have not yet taken the opportunity to like and subscribe to the podcast, feel free to do so below. And if you have any questions for us, you want to reach out, have any, how can I grow in my love for God and others? How can I grow in my relationship with Jesus Christ? You can feel free to reach out to us with those questions as well. We're always happy to help people in their faith journey. But that's all we have for today, and we'll see you again soon. Be blessed.